Thank you for joining our webinar today, Transitioning to EV Fleets, Best Practices and a Decision Tool, which is hosted by the Minnesota Local Road Research Board. My name is Julie Swiler. We're excited to have our presenters, Ali Reza Khani, and the principal investigator, and Alyssa Ryan, the co-investigator, joining us today. I'm going to get started with some information about the Local Road Research Board. The Minnesota Local Road Research Board is a practitioner-run organization that sponsors research and educational initiatives that address local transportation needs. It's run by the people who use the research. The board has 11 city and county practitioners sitting on it. LRRB manages approximately 75 research projects and has about 25 new research projects each year. MnDOT's Office of Research and Innovation administers the LRRB in addition to managing MnDOT research projects. Altogether, the office manages more than 185 research projects in progress, ranging from local initiatives to pooled fund projects with other states, comprising both basic and applied research. You can stay up to date with LRRB and MnDOT research by following us online and subscribing to our newsletters. We will send you website and subscription links in a follow-up email after this webinar. Of course, today we're here to learn about the project Transitioning to EV Fleets. It's wrapping up in the next few months, so if you are interested in receiving the link to the final report once it is available, you can subscribe on the project page and we will send you an email once the report is ready. I will put a link in the chat to the project page that you can go to. I also want to acknowledge the technical advisory panel members for this project. Ali Reza Khani, the principal investigator, and Alyssa Ryan, the co-investigator, who are presenting today. Lyndon Robgent, the technical liaison, who is the public works director at Carver County. Chad Koistra from MnDOT, who is the project coordinator, and the panel members. Chad Milner, engineering director for the city of Edina. Julie Long, city engineer, city of Bloomington. Wayne Sandberg, director of public works and county attorney for Washington County, and Tim Hruska, project manager for WHKS. Before we get started, I'll read the Tennyson warning. This session can be recorded. I'll start over. This session will be recorded for those who cannot attend. If you have enabled your camera during the session, the recording may include your image, which is private data under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. You are not required to allow MnDOT to use your image, and there are no consequences for declining to do so. To opt out of the recording, simply turn off your camera. Now I'm going to hand things over to Chad Koistra to provide background on the project.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. My name is Chad Koistra. I'm a research project coordinator in MnDOT's Office of Research and Innovation, and I'm serving the project coordinator role for this project. I also want to thank Jackie Duran, who is this project's project advisor and our LRRB program manager. So thanks to Jackie, and thanks again to our TAP. Really appreciate having everybody's insight on this project. So brief background here. I know Dr. Khani is going to provide some overview as well, so I will just briefly acknowledge that this project came about around 2023, surrounding the increased use of electric vehicles and increased interest among many organizations to explore options for transitioning to EV fleets. Understanding that EV transition is complex with a lot of different factors to consider, including anxiety about range, driving range in cold climates, especially here, charging infrastructure availability, especially in rural and agencies and rural areas and for smaller agencies, cost, and then different size vehicle fleet conversion as well. So given all that complexity, this study really sought to understand that complexity with some data and provide insights to help interested agencies identify pathways for EV fleet conversion. So a couple of the key tasks here, some of the deliverables that the team has been working on is a literature review of best practices in fleet conversion, surveying fleet vehicle users and managers to understand their perspectives and how they might use fleets and opportunities and challenges that they're considering and confronting when they're looking at fleet conversion. The team also is producing a cost analysis model of EV fleet conversion that agencies can use to consider fleet options. And then the team's providing recommendations for fleet conversion and helping identify potential funding sources. So some of the main products include this webinar, some other materials, summary documents, the 1 to 2 page documents that will help kind of provide high level and easy access to key findings of this project. And then a more detailed final report that, as Julie mentioned, will be available to anybody who signs up for updates on the project's website. So with that, Julie, if you'd like to go to the next slide. Thanks. I'm happy to introduce our presenters. Dr. Alireza Khani is an associate professor of transportation systems in the Department of Civil, Environmental, and Geoengineering, and an affiliate associate professor in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. His research focuses on enhancing transportation accessibility, reliability, sustainability, and equity through the modeling and optimization of multimodal transportation systems and the integration of emerging transportation technologies such as shared mobility and electric vehicles. Dr. Khani's research has been supported by U.S. National Science Foundation, the Federal Transit Administration, and federal, state, and local transportation agencies in Minnesota, Texas, Washington, and California. And then Dr. Alyssa Ryan is an incoming tenure-track assistant professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Michigan State University. Previously, Alyssa was an assistant professor of civil and architectural engineering and mechanics at the University of Arizona. Her research group focuses on leveraging advanced technologies and data analytics to help address the safety and economic challenges faced by transportation agencies and communities. She conducts research on human factors, community needs, safety, and applications of advanced technologies. So with that, I will turn it over to our research team. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see my full presentation now? Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, for attending this webinar. My name is Alireza Khani, and I'm with the University of Minnesota, and I'm making this presentation with my co-investigator, Dr. Ryan. Okay, as a way of background, and Chad also gave a really nice background of the project. 2 years ago, LRRB identified the need for this research on transitioning to EV fleets. Given that all the unknowns around that, given the regulatory targets of adopting EVs in transportation systems in general, 50% target EV share by 2030, and a lot of manufacturers, auto manufacturers, shared their plans of stopping production of ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles, by certain dates. But also the share of EVs in U.S. transportation is only a single digit. I checked a few days ago, and in the first quarter of 2025, there's only less than 10% EV sales share in the U.S. And on the road, this is actually less than 10, definitely less than 10%. So as part of the goal to transition to more sustainable and more environmental friendly vehicles, EVs, a lot of organizations and agencies are eager to consider transitioning their fleets to EVs, but there is a lot of unknowns about that, and the pathway is not clear given all the financial obstacles and infrastructure needs and policy consideration for agencies. So there was this need statement by LRRB to do research on transitioning fleets to EVs. The research need is to gather information, create tools, and develop guidelines to help agencies navigate and potentially accelerate the transition to EV fleets. Our research team was selected to conduct this research, and we are about 70% into the project timeline. We have completed all the main tasks of the project, but we are in the final stages of revising the reports and further verification of and validation of the results. And these are some of the preliminary results that we are sharing with this group. The webinar contains three main parts that are basically the three tasks of the project. Part one is the survey of Minnesota agency fleets, basically sharing the responses that we got from those who participated in the survey and their perspective about EV adoption. Part two is on the human factor aspects of EV adoption, and Dr. Ryan will present that part. And part three is the cost analysis of transitioning to EV fleets, life cycle cost analysis, and charging station planning. Then I will finish with some key takeaways. Part one, the survey of Minnesota agencies. One slide on the methodology of this survey. We created a survey of about 22 questions. We used Qualtrics for creating the survey. Qualtrics is the tool available to the University of Minnesota for surveying and data collection. We distributed the survey with LRRB employees, agency employees through LRRB listserv. Thanks to Julie and the communications teams for coordinating that. The target was fleet managers, public works directors, city, county engineers, operation managers, and so on. Anyone who has some interaction with the fleet, whether it's management, operation, or planning. And we asked for a lot of data and also their perspective on EV adoption. First of all, we asked about their current fleets, what is the fleet composition, the vehicle identification numbers, if they can share that, vehicle trip logs, whether it's GPS or manual logs of the trips, details on fleet operation, and any perspective on EV adoption and perceived obstacles. I'm going to share some of the findings from the responses. We sent it to the LRRB list serve, and we received 45 attempts to respond to the survey, but only 20 complete responses. The rest either left the survey halfway, or there are a couple of redundant submissions. So overall, there are 20 complete responses. Some of them shared complete data, some of them shared more aggregate or no data. And we used all the responses for the analysis. So I will mention anytime we use the complete responses or partial responses. Out of the complete responses, 7 operate more passenger cars and small vehicles than trucks. 13, which is 62% of the responses, indicated that they use more trucks than passenger cars, and some of them even didn't own any passenger cars. And one agency mentioned that they use only trucks in their fleets. Although transit agencies were not the subject of this survey, it happened that one agency operates some transit vehicles, and that's the only response that we get in terms of operating buses. In terms of the fleet usage by time of day, most of the agencies, more than 2/3 of them, indicated that their peak operation time is from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. In the morning, they have the highest operational needs. A few agencies indicated that they have their peak operation during midday or afternoon. And a few of them actually mentioned that they have other time windows for their peak operation and even all-day demand. So their needs is actually different among different agencies, although the majority of them have their peak operation during the morning time. Looking at the trip distances, the trips that their fleets make during a typical day, as a function of their fleet size, we noticed that the smaller fleets tend to make shorter trips, and the larger fleets tend to make a little bit longer trips. Given the small number of samples, this is about 20 samples, a statistical conclusion cannot be made from this data, but there is an anecdotal evidence that larger fleets tend to make longer trips. And this could be only a matter of the geographic area that they serve. If it's a smaller agency serving a smaller region, they may make shorter trips. If it's a bigger agency, bigger city, bigger county, they may make longer trips. Trip distance as a function of number of trips per day follows a similar pattern. The agencies or the fleets that make fewer trips per day tend to have shorter trip distances, but those who make more trips during the day, they tend to have longer trips. In terms of EV adoption status among the current fleets, about 16% of the respondents mentioned that they have some EVs in their fleets. Some of them have very few EVs in their fleet, like less than 5. It could be experimental or pilot adoption of EVs. Some of them mentioned they have tens of EVs in their fleets. And one agency mentioned that they have more than 50 EVs in their fleets. So it seems that a good proportion of agencies are actually adopting EVs. But this is only for those who responded to the survey. There may be a lot of more agencies that they did not respond to the survey, and it may be that they do not have EVs either. Interestingly, one agency mentioned that they have medium or heavy-duty electric vehicles, and for that types of EVs, they rely primarily on depot charging throughout the day. If you look at this graph, for most of the time interval they use, or all of the time interval, they use depot charging. But during the peak operation, which is the morning time, they supplement depot charging with en route charging or public charging. I have more slides on the charging strategy of agencies. Parking happened to be a perceived challenge for agencies. 43% of respondents indicated that they cannot accommodate parking for EVs if they convert their fleets to EVs. Some of the specific challenges include installation and infrastructure costs, the fact that retrofitting parking facilities with electrical upgrades is going to be expensive. Space limitation, space constraints, having dedicated parking for EV charging or managing the time of day charging for different types of vehicles, EVs and non-EVs, and managing the congestion in the parking area happen to be a perceived concern for agencies. And also for adoption of medium and heavy-duty EVs, power availability seems to be a challenge, given that medium and heavy duties are going to need a lot of power to get charged. So power availability is another concern for agencies. This table shows the current and planned charging strategies for the agencies. The first column or the middle column shows the current charging strategy that they're using. This is only the agencies that have some EVs in their fleets. Most of them have, actually all the agencies who responded to this question have depot charging, and some of them supplemented with public or en route charging. The amount of depot charging is actually high, in most cases more than 70% depot charging. But interestingly, if you look at the future charging plans or their desired charging plans when they transition to EVs, it seems that they indicated interest in a good, healthy mix of different charging strategies, depot charging, public charging, and en route charging. So agencies tend to be open to considering different types of charging strategies. In terms of charging technology, We have level 1, level 2, and level 3, which is DC fast charging. Level 1 is the slowest one using regular power outlets, and it may take about a couple of days to charge a regular passenger EV. Level 2 is the most common and most practical one, and it can charge an EV overnight. And DC fast charging is the ultimate fast charging that is very expensive to install, but it could charge a typical passenger EV in about 1 hour. And agencies indicated that they use a mix of different charging technologies. Some of them only, I mean, if they're small or they have fewer EVs, they have only level 1 charging, but other ones have a mix of level 2 and level 1, or DC fast charging and level 1. In general, those agencies who have some level 2 or DC fast charging tend to be satisfied with the charging technology. If they are heavily relying on level 1 charging, they are less satisfied given the slow charging rate of level 1s. So in general, it seems to it seems that having a mix of different charging technologies could help agencies manage their charging needs. And this slide actually shows some of the agency perspectives on interagency charger sharing. Given that charging infrastructure is expensive for some agencies and they may not be able to afford it within their financial limitations, we asked about whether they are willing to share charging with other agencies, especially for smaller agencies. This could be an option. Only 18% of agencies indicated that they are willing to share chargers only during off-peak hours. 23% said they are opposed to sharing charging with other agencies. And 59%, the majority, said they are uncertain about sharing charging with other agencies, which is not surprising given that sharing is less known. There's a lot of factors in this. Of those agencies who said they're willing to share charging with other agencies, they insisted on prioritizing their own fleet's needs before giving charging access to other agencies. And the agencies also indicated a few barriers to sharing, including security and access. If it's a gated facilities, how to arrange access for other agencies to use charging in their own facility could be a challenge. Cost recovery is another challenge, how to split the utility bills between their own fleets and the guest fleets who use their charging. And also infrastructure gaps was another concern, given that in some rural areas and some rural agencies, there's a lack of chargers entirely. And some other policy or practical constraints include the fact that some agencies may prohibit charging of non-governmental vehicles, and some other mentioned self-sufficiency, the fact that they want to have their own charging supplies for their own fleets, or they await clear cost-benefit data. Again, this is not surprising because there's a lot of unknown about sharing, all the billing, infrastructure, access, security, and everything. It seems to be a point of future research to shed more lights on this. So at this point, I conclude the presentation of the key points from the survey. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ryan to present the human factor aspects of it.
Thank you so much. Oh no, my camera is being weird today. I apologize. All right. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of that human factors component, which is essentially how do different people kind of handle and how are they going to accept transitioning to using electric vehicles? So we did a survey, and I'll get back into that, but just a little bit of a background. So gas-powered vehicles, we know, are major contributors of CO2 emissions. And we also know that EVs are a cleaner alternative, which is why it may be of interest to many local agencies. We also know that agencies are key adopters, and when we talk about early technologies, they're usually the ones to put them in place potentially before the public may do that. So they're really a good way to align with agency goals. Some challenges with adoption, though, that we've already talked a little bit about are range anxiety, perhaps unfamiliar technology, limited charging stations may become an infrastructure gap in particular, as well as some trust issues. And we'll dive a little bit into that, but that's what has been proven so far. We also know in terms of behavior trends, like who may be willing more to adopt these different technologies. And in general, we see that tech savvy and male consumers show higher adoption rates, but incentives can make a large difference in boosting motivation to accept new technologies. So our objective for this task was to really understand that human factors component, which may influence EV adoption in agency fleets within Minnesota, as well as assess perceived convenience, reliability, and workplace readiness for EV integration, and really understand those real world concerns related to EVs. And how we did this, again, we created a survey to look at how does the human factors really influence EV adoption by sending out a survey through Qualtrics, reaching out to agency employees throughout Minnesota at the local level. And this was really, again, to capture those attitudes towards EV adoptions, perhaps some concerns and expectations, but really gather that broader professional perspective and highlight trends related to the EV experience. To dive even deeper beyond that survey, we did follow-up interviews, 15 minutes on Zoom with 5 key stakeholders who took the survey. We found some folks who we wanted to talk to a little bit more in depth to see what those challenges may be that they may perceive related to EVs. And this allowed for more conversation and more role-specific nuanced concerns that were brought up. So in terms of the survey, we had 86 responses, which was really helpful. The breakdown of the different roles included fleet managers, operation managers, field staff, mechanics and engineers, directors and supervisors. And in terms of experience, we had about 50% which had over 6 years in their current role. And in terms of vehicle use, like how often those folks use those fleet vehicles for their agencies, over 50% use them daily, while only 2% have never used an agency vehicle. We did have a higher male split at 87% than female in our responses. And in terms of EV stats of the agencies, 21 distinct agencies reported using EVs. However, they were a smaller portion of their fleet, and only a few used them for construction and emergency services. And I'm going to dive a bit into those specific responses. So in terms of the sentiments towards the transition from traditional vehicles to electric vehicles, it was kind of across the board, as you can see here, from very positive to very negative, with a lot of folks who were pretty neutral on that topic. But we did have 42% who were in that somewhat to very negative sentiment towards electric vehicles. In terms of the perceived benefits of electric vehicles, we saw that fuel cost savings was one of the highest. Reduced environmental impact was also very high, and improved technology. We also have some folks who put some other reasonings in. Very few noted the enhanced driving experience, which you may experience in an electric vehicle. And we didn't ask, again, break these down in terms of like who's driven an electric vehicle and who hasn't. This was everyone together, and they could select multiple boxes for this question. In terms of those key concerns among respondents, that limited driving range came up with almost every single person who responded, as well as their availability of charging stations where they're going to charge their electric vehicle. And I'll dive a bit into that in the future questions. Charging time was also a high concern, as well as initial cost, and maintenance and repair came up for just about almost everyone who responded as well. In terms of the safety and reliability of electric vehicles, most people were in that somewhat concerned to very concerned range, which is reasonable. When we talk about in terms of, the vehicle range of these vehicles, it's different than traditional vehicles, or at least it's not as expected. And dive a bit more into that as well. And in terms of concerns regarding the safety, we had a number of yeses and nos split closely down the middle here, and I'll dive a bit into that. So again, we had 45% who were somewhat concerned, 22% were very concerned when it comes to reliability. And what did this boil down to when they were writing about it? That cold weather reduces battery performance. Parts availability, are the mechanics going to be trained to work on EVs that they already have and that they work with? How do we find those new people? How do we train those new mechanics? This is especially a concern in the rural areas. Reliability for long shifts, how long will the vehicle last? How long do I have to wait for it to be charged up, etc. And others were saying that they'd like some more long-term data before they're going to start using EVs. This came up particularly in the more rural areas. In terms of the safety perspectives, we saw a number of folks reporting that EVs are safer, while others reporting safety concerns. The battery fire risk was a conversation point that came up, as well as increased vehicle weight, which could increase crash severity for vulnerable road users. Electric vehicles are a bit heavier than other vehicles. In terms of preferences and expectations of EVs, we found a high percentage, almost 70%, have not yet used an EV at work. And among those users who have, about 16% have never had training, 10% approximately received training before using an EV, and about 2% were trained but haven't yet used one. But in terms of the training formats that folks prefer, they prefer hands-on demonstrations. Online resources seem to be a preference. Informational workshops, detailed user manuals were a bit lower on the list than these more hands-on approaches that you can see here. In terms of familiarity levels, it was strong on like the battery life, which I've talked about, the charging time range, the environmental impact, but there was low understanding of the maintenance needs of EVs. So that was a high talking point within the survey, and total cost of ownership in terms of the cost through the lifetime of them compared to traditional vehicles. Moving on. There we go. In terms of some more preferences, the majority support agency consideration for staff feedback. They thought it was really important for the staff to consider the folks who will be using the vehicles before just putting them in place and having those conversations. They also were really concerned about the battery life, the charging time, and making accessible charging stations. So for example, the charging station perhaps needs to be on site within the building that they work in. It can't be, at a place where it'd be difficult to access the vehicle or go during work hours when it could be charging on site overnight. There also needs to be some financial feasibility, political feasibility for their region, important in terms of staff acceptance and having those conversations rather than just putting them in place. So in terms of desired features, that longer battery life, as I mentioned, was almost everyone who responded. Those faster charging times and more charging stations were also the majority of folks. From our conversations we had during those interviews with those 5 different key stakeholders, which were about 15 minutes via Zoom, we dove a bit more into those concerns, and we talked to a range of folks throughout the state of Minnesota at the local level. Some concerns that came up in multiple of these conversations were those infrastructure and range concerns. So specifically those long rural distances, they were concerned about what would that be on the battery? What would it look like? How would they handle it? What would it look like in winter? They really wanted someone else to kind of test it out before they were to be applied within their own region, especially in those more rural areas where this is a large cost to transition to these types of vehicles. Limited public and indoor charging options, they just aren't yet installed in many places, so that was a concern, as well as indoor outdoor facilities in terms of installation. Harsh winters was again coming up in terms of battery degradation and reliability of the vehicles with the climate in Minnesota in particular. It's been in terms of its testing. And agencies are really cautious about using EVs, again, due to that risk more in rural areas than in the urban environments. We also talked about them not being suitable for heavy duty vehicles such as snow plowing. We haven't tested that yet, so that was a concern that was talked about, as well as the cost of total ownership. And again, that need for in-house mechanics who know how to use and work with EVs in particular. And lastly, EVs were really favored towards that light duty use. So passenger vehicles, maybe going to a meeting 5 minutes downtown, rather than going out and doing something more intense that's maybe 20 miles to 40 miles outside of the city. So positive more for the urban environment, more concerns for the more rural areas. Another talking point was that agencies aligning their plans. So some of the agencies we spoke to had specific plans for integrating EVs towards their sustainability goals, while other regions didn't have necessarily the same sustainability goals. So it wasn't really, there was less of a need for their community to integrate that at this time, while some that was a high favoring point. And again, emphasis on internal training rather than necessarily outsourcing came up. With that, I'll pass it off to Dr. Connie to continue talking about our next stage. After my last slide here, I apologize, Dr. Connie, forgot about this one. So just to wrap up, what agencies can use that can help them move forward with EV fleets. Oh, if my slide wants to work here. Oh no, there we go. So I'll just go over this briefly. Multiple agencies mentioned grants could be strong motivators. More charging infrastructure would be really helpful. Rural areas we saw have it a wait and see approach, see how other regions put it in place before they take it up and put that extra cost in to see what happens. Community alignment is key. We really want incentives to perhaps push that, but having a mandate, which was brought up in multiple conversations, may backfire and may not be as useful for the communities to really accept electric vehicles at the fleet level. Agencies can ask for manufactured supported training programs and upskill their own internal teams for cost saving in the long term. But again, those battery safety infrastructure issues they thought needed to be addressed prior to them going in place. But they did know that they are crucial at reducing emissions and can help towards their sustainability goals. All right, I apologize, Dr. Connie. With that, I'll pass it off to you officially.
Thank you, and no worries. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the third part of the project. Basically, this is the cost analysis of transitioning to EV fleets. And this is the task that is just completed, and we are in the revision stage. So some of the results may be preliminary. This task has two subparts, part A and part B. In part A, we did a life cycle cost analysis of EVs and comparison with ICE vehicles. In terms of the methodology, we calculated the total cost of ownership for existing ICE vehicles and equivalent EVs, if there is an equivalent EV for them. That cost includes initial purchase cost and any applicable incentives at the time of conducting this research, and also ongoing cost, the mileage-based fuel and maintenance cost for a 10-year life cycle, assuming that vehicles are good for 10 years. And important thing is that we use the annual mileage values from the survey results when agencies shared their fleet's information, including the make model of their vehicles and the odometer reading of the vehicle, the current odometer reading. We just estimated what is the annual mileage of each vehicle, and then we use that in the analysis. So this is not based on the standard 10,000 or 12,000 miles per year, but more based on the actual reading of the mileage. Comparing the life cycle cost of ICE vehicles and EVs. The bars here show the total cost for the fleets, for the ICE, the bars on the left, and the EVs, the bars on the right. And for each bar, there are two sections. The lower section shows the upfront cost, and the top section shows the ongoing cost, the fuel and maintenance cost. And we see that for most of the cases, EVs have higher upfront cost, and but lower operational cost, the top part of each bar. And in general, in most of the cases, the total cost of ownership is higher in EVs compared to ICE or current vehicles. Again, I want to mention that what is included in this analysis, this is including only the ICE vehicles for which there is an equivalent EV. And if some of the fleets are already EV, they are not included in this. So it's just more of a relative comparison of cost for the existing and the potential converted to EV fleets. So in general, most of the cases show that EVs could not benefit agencies in terms of the financial cost saving. But here's not the end of the story, because this is the complete fleets for each agency. If we do a breakdown by vehicle class, light duty, medium duty, and heavy duty, we see slightly different results. Focusing on light duty vehicles, we see that EVs are at cost parity or at lower cost than ICE vehicles. In most of the cases, converting to EVs in the light duty section of the fleet could lead to cost saving for agencies. Therefore, light duty is considered as a good starting point for transition to EVs. For medium duty vehicle, this is completely different. And in most of the cases, maybe all of the cases, medium duty EVs are going to be more expensive to own and operate than current ICE vehicles. The reason is primarily because of the higher upfront cost of medium duty EVs. I mean, they are at a stage in the technology that they are significantly more expensive than current medium duty ICE vehicles. So therefore, medium duty vehicles are most challenging to transition to EVs. For the heavy duty, there's an interesting finding based on the results, is that the results are actually mixed. For some cases, heavy duty EVs could be more cost effective, and some of them may not be cost effective. The reason is that for heavy duty vehicles, there is a significant fuel cost saving and maintenance cost saving when transitioning to EVs. However, we should note that in the heavy duty sector, the options for EV is very limited at this stage, and converting heavy duty vehicles to EVs may not be the most low-hanging fruit at this stage. This is something to consider in future phases. So in general, light duty is a great starting point. Heavy duty could be the next step for consideration as the technology evolves and matures. And then medium duty apparently is the most challenging one at this point. The next part of the analysis in this task is the charging station planning. And as part of the transition to EV fleets, we need to plan for charging stations also. But it's a common knowledge that transitioning to EVs cannot happen overnight or in a single stage due to budget constraints and infrastructure limitations and all other barriers. Therefore, a more phased transition to EVs is more likely. And for that reason, for this task of the project, we focus on a multi-stage fleet sizing and charging infrastructure planning. I mentioned fleet sizing here because one of the findings that I did not mention in previous slides, but it may be available in the report, is that at the current mileage reading of the vehicles, some of the cases EVs would not be provide more cost saving because the vehicles are not used that much to provide great operational cost saving. But if there could be fleet right sizing and reduction of the number of vehicles, but increasing the utilization of the vehicles, the payback period could be shorter and EVs could be more cost effective and more beneficial for the agencies. So basically what is going to happen, or the recommendation is basically do fleet right sizing as well as charging infrastructure planning. And for that, we developed a framework. This is based on collecting all the trip data and analyzing them and forming daily trips and tours. A tour of a vehicle means a chain of the trips that it makes, starting from their home base, visiting multiple locations or one location, and coming back to the home base. This is a tour. We define it for the purpose of this analysis. And then we calculate the minimum fleet size based on the frequency of the tours and the length of the tours. And then based on that, we identify charging station locations and capacity. How many charging do we need to support that minimum number of vehicles to fulfill the operational needs of the agency? And then assigning EVs to charging to provide enough charging for them. I have a few slides to go through this and show a guideline of this planning. I demo it with some of the results for the city of Minneapolis fleets. This is the agency that provided the most granular data, and we use it as a demonstration of our proposed framework. But this is basically could be replicated for other agencies if some sort of data is available. So this is a six-step guidelines for charging station planning. The first step is data collection, and we recommend about compiling about 6 to 12 months of trip data. It could be telematics data, GPS logs of the trips if it's available. If not, in some smaller agencies, it may be a manual log of the trips with the start and end point, the locations and times. And by analyzing the data, we suggest mapping all the trip start and end points to identify the home base of each vehicle and show it on the map, like the picture on the right that shows it for the city of Minneapolis. By that, we can identify the potential location for charging, but this is going to be a lot of locations because all the home bases of all the trips. In a future slide, I have a method to consolidate it to a more suitable candidates. Step 2 is the feasibility of transitioning to EVs. By using trip data, whether from GPS or manual logs, we recommend checking the maximum operating mileage of each vehicle during the day and comparing those mileage values with EV ranges. The graph that shows on the right is the result from a sample data from City of Minneapolis fleet. This is only based on a 5-day sample. This is not a comprehensive sample, but just for the demonstration of the method. Here on the horizontal axis, we have the tour length ranging from 0 to 120 miles. And we see that both in terms of tour frequency and number of vehicles that make those tours, most of them are less than 60 miles. The strong majority of them are less than 60 miles, which is well below the available range of EVs nowadays. By doing this analysis, we can determine whether depot-only charging is sufficient or whether we need public or en route charging. If the tour length is less than range of the EVs, safely less than the range of EVs, we can assume that we don't need en route charging, and we can supply EVs with depot charging and potentially overnight depot charging if there is enough chargers to manage charging all the EVs in the fleet. The third step is charger siting, and that's basically clustering all the nearby locations to eliminate any redundancies. In many cases, and especially for larger, bigger agencies that have multiple facilities, parking lots, garages, and so on, and office buildings, there may be multiple locations from which fleets are dispatched. And by clustering them and consolidating them, we could plan for one charging station that could support multiple nearby facilities. Or by having multiple clusters, we can have multiple candidate locations for charging stations. So a little bit of geospatial analysis would be needed to cluster these points to identify the candidate charging stations. The fourth step is back to the trip data and tour data. This is a little bit more involved analysis depending on data availability. What we suggest is to group tours by time intervals during the day. It could be anything from 1 hour time interval or 30 minutes or 2 hours, depending on the granularity of the data and the resolution of the analysis that we desire. The top graph shows the tour frequency in blue line that shows obvious peak tour frequency in early morning from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. And again, this is only for a subset of fleets of the city of Minneapolis. It could be very different among different types of vehicles, different fleets, and so on. By creating this tour frequency profile and also the red dashed line that shows the average tour duration, we can combine them. We propose the formula that can tell us how many vehicles we need to fulfill this number of tours with the given tour lengths in each time interval. And the results would be a profile of how many vehicles we need to have in hand in each time interval to be able to fulfill the the jobs, fulfill the operational needs of the agency in that time interval. That we call it the minimum number of vehicles required for the operation. And the fifth step is probably the most comprehensive analysis, more involved, is planning for chargers and assigning chargers, EVs to the chargers. And this is a more iterative process that if we have a phased transition plan for each phase and for each budget, budget or electrification phase, we select depots, specify the charger types and capacities, given the capacity of that location, how much power is available to that location, how much parking is available in that location, and so on. We determine the charging types and capacity, and then we calculate the EV fleet size for that location, meeting the minimums from the previous step. And then we repeat and iterate these to plan for charging at multiple locations, multiple phases, and assigning EVs to those charging stations. The output of this step would be a least cost mix of EVs, chargers, and required depot upgrades. Basically, the fleet cost and the infrastructure cost combined. Unless it's a very, very small fleet, this cannot be done manually. And for the purpose of this project, we developed a customized optimization model that takes all the inputs from the data from the previous steps and gives us a recommendation about the fleet size and charging locations that gives the minimum total cost in multiple phases of transition. As part of the deliverables of this project, we can provide more information about optimization model and potentially provide it for agency to use it for their own planning. And the last step is the stage implementation and development execution timeline based on fiscal year budget and so on. And we recommend refreshing the budget, the data periodically to make sure that the plan reflects the updated cost and operational needs, and the output would be a phased rollout schedule and continuous improvement loop. Overall, this is going to be a longer process, multi-stage process involving multiple types of data, multiple types of analysis, but this is not impossible at all. With good data, with good knowledge, this is definitely possible. And based on that, I have some key takeaways to conclude the presentation. In terms of the feasibility or cost analysis of transitioning to EVs, light-duty vehicles have better life cycle cost compared to internal combustion engine vehicles, and they make the light-duty fleet a strong starting point for electrification. For medium and heavy-duty vehicles, the upfront cost at the current stage is higher, and it outweighs the long-term operational savings of EVs. Therefore, medium-duty vehicles are more challenging to transition to EVs. And unless there is increasing utilization with fleet right sizing and so on, medium-duty vehicles may be far from being cost-effective to be transitioned to EVs. And heavy-duty vehicles, again, they provide great ongoing cost saving, but because of the limited options in the market and the technology that needs to be more mature, more evolved, and the cost be reduced, heavy-duty vehicles is something to consider in future phases. Again, I'm emphasizing on light-duty vehicles that present a starting point for fleet electrification. Also, I want to emphasize on fleet right sizing and higher annual mileage per EVs. If we have 200 vehicles, but we can basically provide that operation with 180 vehicles, but more mileage per vehicle, that would lead to not only cost saving in terms of the number of vehicles, but also cost saving in terms of the operation of EVs compared to ICE vehicles. So fleet right sizing and higher annual mileage could shorten the payback period for EVs. And the case study of the City of Minneapolis fleet provide high confidence in EV transition potential. The vast majority of tours are on their current EV ranges. making home-based depot charging sufficient for supporting the EVs. And even with good assignment of EVs to charging stations, if charging stations are enough for supporting the EVs, there's potential for managing all the charging overnight to take advantage of lower electricity tariffs, and also to making sure that the operation during day is not interrupted. I'd like to acknowledge those who contributed to this project. Our graduate students, Nastaran Kwanko at the University of Minnesota, who worked with me, and Sushmita, who worked with Dr. Ryan at the University of Arizona. Of course, the project team, Lyndon and Chad, excuse me, members of the technical advisory panel and MnDOT LRRB communications teams. Of course, Julie, thank you very much for organizing this webinar. And with that, I'm going to conclude and open it up to questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Dr. Khani and Dr. Ryan. That was great. Really, a lot of information there and well presented. So thank you so much. Yeah, we do have a few minutes left for questions. So if you have a question, please feel free to leave it in the chat. Good discussion there going already. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question that way. I'll just look at a couple. There's a question came up. Just wondering what size vehicle a school bus would fall into, what category?
Oh, a school bus, I think it would be under heavy duty.
And then another question asking, Beth asked, will you be doing any additional work on depot charging and how that can impact cost feasibility of vehicle transition?
Yes, that's a great question, because part of the transition cost is planning for charging infrastructure. And we are doing the cost analysis in the last task that I just presented. I do not have a lot of detailed information and numbers in this presentation, but we will have more information in the final report showing the example numbers for one fleet. That would be likely the city of Minneapolis, because we have more data available from city of Minneapolis. So yes, absolutely, this is very important, and we will include that in the calculation.
All right. Yeah, go ahead, Christian. You might be muted still.
It looks like we may need to allow the microphones for individuals if they're not speakers.
I will unmute them if you want to move on to another person while I do that.
Yeah, I'll just ask Simon's question. Is one charger typically allocated to multiple EVs and depot charging, or does each EV have a dedicated charger?
I would say it's one charger for multiple EVs, or multiple EVs could use one charger, but also it depends on the capacity of the charger and the battery capacity and operation of the vehicle. If it's a level 1 charger, as I mentioned, for a typical passenger EVs that some of us may own, we see on the road, for level 1, it may take multiple days to charge that EV. So it may be difficult to share it with multiple EVs because it's just not enough power to charge multiple EVs. For level 2, it's more practical, more cost effective, given that electrical upgrade is not huge. There's a little, but not huge. But also it provides good charging rate, good charging speed, I would say, and that could be available to supply multiple EVs, again depending on their operational schedule. For DC fast charging, they're very expensive to build, but they're super fast and they can charge vehicles, typical passenger EVs, in about an hour. So basically, yeah, they can be shared among multiple EVs. But the challenge is the infrastructure cost and the electrical upgrades.
Thank you. And Christian, would you like to unmute your mic. Thanks.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, and good morning. I was curious about two things, actually. One is that I noticed the range of trips usually range from 20 to 40 miles, but the survey respondents were frustrated with charging times because I think they were having some charging anxiety. Were those people rural fleets that were concerned about the charging times because they were going further? Because 20 to 40 miles is a pretty small amount on a current EV battery range of, on average 275 miles range. So I was curious about that. The other thing I was curious about was the specific reference to concerns regarding mandates. Were there any specific mandates they were concerned about? Or was it just broad, general, top-down mandate concerns? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I try to answer the first question and then hand it over to Alyssa to add more to the first question and answer the second question. The first question was about the concerns about charging. And I don't remember off the top of my head which agency specifically mentioned the concern about charging, but we will have the list of all the respondents to the survey in the final report. We'll include that, and we also have a map of showing where those agencies are located. So I apologize that I don't have a specific answer to that now, but I'll provide that in the report. But if I want to share my insights about that, it also depends on the type of charger that they have. If it's a level 1 charger, it's going to be slow. And even if the EV has about 200 miles range, but it can only get charged just at tens of miles overnight. I mean, something about 20, 30, 40 miles overnight. Again, it depends on the speed of the charging, that even though the capacity of the battery is enough for daily operation, but it cannot be charging cannot be replenished overnight or something like that. I'm going to hand it over to Alyssa. If you have any insights about the range anxiety concerns about people among people responded to the survey, and also answering the second question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the range anxiety, I think it often just comes from folks who haven't used the EVs enough to know how that may become a concern. It's just there also aren't a ton of studies out there, particularly in heavy cold climates, using it for work, that sort of thing. So I think it was just more the unknown of it. In terms of the mandates, yeah, that just came up in the interview conversations that we had during the Zoom calls. No, there were no specific mandates they were referencing. I think they were just concerned that, like, if this came through and it was mandated throughout the state, how would their agency handle it? And so that's how that came up. Just like if it were to happen, they thought incentives would be much better than like forcing their agency to do it, say, at a certain time from their perspective. And I don't want to call anyone out from specific agencies, but I do know that that came up a bit more in the rural agencies than it did in more urban environments.
Thanks, and thanks, Christian, for the great questions. Got 3 questions from Robert, and then I see one from Jem as well in the Q&A, and then I'll read Victor's question. So Robert's asking, have you or will you consider what effect utility rate structures can have on operating costs for these fleets?
That's a great question, and the short answer is yes. In the optimization model that we developed in the later part of the presentation, in order to minimize the cost of infrastructure and operation, we included different electricity rates during different times of the day, and the optimization model aims to schedule charging activities during the times that the electricity is cheaper. So again, yes, with rigorous planning and modeling of the EV operation, this can definitely be taken into consideration. Again, more information in the report will be available, but the short answer is yes.
Thanks. And Robert also asked, what does en route mean in your analysis for non-fixed route duty cycles?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you remember, I mentioned the concept of tours. That is a chain of the trips that a vehicle would make, starting from the home base, going, visiting multiple locations and doing some jobs and coming back to the home base. If the charger is at the home base, it's considered depot charging or home base charging. But if it's charging at different locations, that is not the home base of that vehicle, and the vehicle could get some partial charge to be able to continue the operation during the rest of the day, that would be considered en route charging.
Thanks. And then last question here from Robert is, what, if anything, have you found in your work so far that is unique to Minnesota?
Yes, that's an excellent question. I'm going to try to answer this question and hand it over to Alisa if she has more. We use the data from Minnesota agencies and we listen to Minnesota agencies. So we did 2 rounds of surveys. I mean, one is on the fleet information and the other one on the human aspects and the perspective of that. I would say we rely our analysis based on the data and input from Minnesota agencies. This is not based on other data. Other than that, I can't think of anything. There may be, but I can't think of anything.
Yeah, I can add a little bit. So there really haven't been studies that have looked at the human factors component of fleet transitions to EV vehicles, like at all. So just that alone and looking at Minnesota agencies in particular in the surveys and interviews allowed us to gather information in general. But in terms of how it is unique to Minnesota, I would say that the rural conversations that we had, Minnesota has a lot more rural regions than a lot of other states. Say a study was done in New York City, looked a little different than the concerns that popped up in Minnesota, for example, as well as the cold weather aspect and needs to go on longer driving trips and have heavier duty vehicles than say they would in mostly New York City. And I mentioned New York City because again, that's the only big reference we had that have looked at this at all in the past. But the results in terms of technology acceptance and things of that nature really looked pretty similar in our results than what we found in the literature. So that wasn't incredibly surprising, but the specific needs were found to be specific to Minnesota, though I can't say whether Idaho would have the same results necessarily. We'd have to talk to them.
All right, thank you. Question from Jem Thompson. When comparing life cycle costs of EVs versus ICE vehicles, what prices were used for EVs? Were any tax credits or incentives included?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, we for each vehicle in the reported fleets, we found an equivalent EV that is within the same class functional characteristics and so on. And we pulled the price information from public sources to see what is the purchase price of that EV. And then we considered any federal state incentives for purchasing that EV, any tax credit that is available to offset the initial purchase costs of the EVs. And this is, of course, at the time of conducting this research, which was earlier this year, but things could change.
Thank you. And just read a question from Victor. How many gallons of water does it take to put out an EV vehicle fire versus a vehicle with normal fuel? Is that considered in this?
I'm not sure about answering that question. Could you repeat the question or maybe clarify?
Yeah, just asking how many gallons of water it takes to put out an EV vehicle fire versus a vehicle with normal fuel.
Oh, okay. Unfortunately, I don't have information on that, but we can definitely look into finding information on that.
Right, thank you. I've thought that it's a lot more water, says Beth.
Okay.
Claire asked regarding the trainings referenced in the human factors section. You mentioned there was improved familiarity of battery life and charging time. do you know if these trainings included any step-by-steps for planning trips to accommodate for charging en route? For example, mapping the route and noting available chargers if needed, etc.
No, that's really interesting. We didn't dive at all into in the interviews or the survey, like what types of trainings they've taken or what exists out there. Though I imagine that information, if we sent another survey out, like, could you send us the exact trainings? Maybe not as part of this project because we're wrapping up, but in the future, I think that would be pretty interesting. But we didn't dive into exactly what types of trainings and access to the trainings that they have. I do know that a few different agencies use the manufacturer specific trainings, but again, we haven't analyzed those at all. So I apologize, can't answer that question in any depth.
Thank you. Thanks, Quang Ho, for answering some of the questions in the chat too. I appreciate keeping an eye on that. Question from Jed asking, will that utility cost analysis also include impact of demand charge costs versus electricity consumed?
If I understand it correctly, this is referring to the supply of electricity before getting to the charging. Is that correct? Or could you please clarify the question?
Yeah, Jed, if you're on, if you'd like to clarify any of that.
Oh, in the meantime, I can answer some questions that I see. Sorry, Chad, but I see a lot of chat is going on about the different types of EVs. But I want to clarify that in the survey part, we included both battery electric vehicle and plug-in hybrid vehicles. But in the life cycle cost analysis, we only included battery electric vehicles. And we do not include just hybrid vehicles, like all the hybrid stuff.
Thanks, Alireza. I gave you access, Jed. Thank you for letting me know.
Yeah, just real briefly, utilities, most often we think about time of day charges in terms of adjusting our rates, but utilities often, in fact, mostly or often, nearly always charge a demand charge based on how much electricity they have to have available for you at any time if you're going to turn on a switch. And in some cases, if you're an incredibly large energy user, those demand charges actually can make up a significant part of your bill. And do you know if there's been any analysis with that that is being considered in this study?
Yeah, thank you very much for clarifying the questions. And that's definitely an important aspect that should be considered. In this analysis, given that this is more about planning for infrastructure and EVs with some estimates of charging uses, so we do not include the demand or dynamic pricing, if I use that term, but we just assume that different times of the day there is peak and off-peak rates. Is it possible to include that? I would say yes, but probably not in the scope of this project. Yes, I think my short answer is no, we did not include dynamic pricing. We only include time of day pricing, but that could definitely be included in an analysis if sufficient data and information is available about the pricing model by utility companies.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Any other questions? Thanks for the comments and dialogue in the chat too. I'll make sure we save that. Beth mentioned that demand charge information would be very valuable to understand total cost of operation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the feedback, and we will consider that in our future research. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Tim asked when the final project report is anticipated to be available. I think otherwise I know I would say either late this year or early next year. Is that what we're targeting?
Correct. The project schedule is set to, the project is going to end by the end of December, and the last task is the editorial and publication of the report. So it could happen in December, or if not, it may be available on the internet or on MnDOT website in early January.
Thanks. Yeah, and there is at the beginning of the chat, if you'd like to look in there, Julie added a link to the website for this project. So you can go to that link and click on subscribe for updates, and then you will get emails when the report is published. James asked a good question as well. Has there been any concerns with electrical grid infrastructure?
We did not really investigate that in this project, but I know from other projects that I was involved, yes, there's definitely some uncertainties, concerns among utility companies about supplying enough power to charging stations. And actually, it was also mentioned in some of the survey responses that agencies had concerns about the ability to provide enough power for charging medium heavy duty vehicles. And that concern actually probably comes from the fact that in their interaction with the utility companies, they know that there is obstacles in providing that much power, whether it needs upgrading their infrastructure and so on. But I would say from all of the projects that I work on EVs, yes, this is big concerns, and probably more conversation, more studies, more investigations are needed to see what are the impacts from the utility side of the things.
Thanks. And yeah, Don mentioned Xcel is still working on implementing time of day electrical rates for residential customers in Minnesota. Yeah, could have an impact on who takes a company vehicle home at night, that kind of thing. All right, if there's nothing else, I think yeah, we'll wrap it up here. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Dr. Connie and Dr. Ryan and your teams for all the work that you've done on this project and for sharing everything. Thanks again to our technical advisory panel and Lyndon as well, technical liaison for this project. Really appreciate having that local insights throughout this project. Thanks to Julie and our communications team for everything, setting this up. And thanks again, everybody, for joining. We will email you a link to the recording of today's presentation and links to any other resources we've discussed as well. And that wraps it up. So thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great day.